Hi there. Today, we are slipping back in time, not just to any place, but into the heart of Korea's longest ruling Confucian dynasty, Joseon. Picture yourself standing under the vast curved roof of a palace gate. Intricate green and blue patterns called dancheong swirl above you, a riot of color against the dark, heavy timber. The air smells of pine wood, damp earth, and the faint, sweet scent of incense from a distant hall. Courtiers in shimmering silk robes and impossibly wide-brimmed hats glide past their faces, serene masks of courtly etiquette. It's beautiful, isn't it? Almost peaceful. Don't get too used to it, though. Given the political climate, you probably wouldn't survive your first week here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all watching from, so please drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's always a little magical to think of us all drifting off to the same story from different corners of the world. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are inside the walls now, and the sheer scale of the place is the first thing that truly lands. This isn't just a building. It's a sprawling, self-contained universe. You found yourself in Gyeongbok Palace, the Palace of Shining Happiness, the primary residence of the Joseon kings. It's a city within a city, a meticulously planned labyrinth of stone-paved courtyards, cavernous audience halls, private royal quarters, and tranquil gardens that seem to stretch for miles. The grandeur is meant to inspire awe, to project the absolute authority of the Son of Heaven. But as you'll soon learn, grandeur is just a pretty word for pressure. Let's be realistic about your new life. You aren't royalty. You're not even a high-ranking noble. You've managed to secure a position as a low-level court attendant. Perhaps you're a nain, a young palace lady in training, or a junior eunuch having made a rather significant sacrifice for a life of service. Your days are a blur of endless repetitive and meticulous tasks. You might spend an entire morning polishing the wooden floors of a single corridor until you can see your own exhausted face reflected in the dark wood. You might spend your afternoon carrying sealed messages on foot, your legs aching as you traverse what feels like the entire length of Seoul within the palace walls. Or maybe your job is simply to stand silently for hours holding a silk and paper lantern, waiting for a royal consort who may or may not even appear. The first and most important rule you absorb is the art of strategic invisibility. You see everything, but you say nothing. Your eyes must always be downcast, your posture deferential. Making direct eye contact with a member of the royal family is a shocking breach of protocol, an offense that could see you flogged or expelled in disgrace. You quickly learn to read the atmosphere not with your eyes, but with all your other senses. You can feel the tension in the air. You can hear the subtle shift in a queen's mood. From the whispery rustle of her silk skirt, you can interpret the clipped, dismissive tone of a minister's order. Survival here depends on your ability to become human sonar. Your new wardrobe is a constant scratchy reminder of your place in this rigid hierarchy. The fabric is coarse, the colors are muted, earth tones a world away from the vibrant jewel-toned silks and intricate gold leaf patterns worn by the royals. Every single element of dress is coded. The patterns embroidered on a princess's gown, the number of ornate jade pins in a concubine's hair, the precise shape and material of an official's hat. It all signifies rank power, current favor, or lack thereof. It's the Joseon version of a corporate ID badge, but flashing the wrong credentials can lead to far more than a sternly worded email from HR. And then there's the food. As a low-ranking servant, your meals are simple, and sustaining a bowl of barley rice, a thin vegetable soup, and a side of salty fermented kimchi. But you get to witness the spectacle of the royal meal, the surasang. Served on a massive table, it consists of 12 distinct dishes each, in its own gleaming brass or silver bowl, arranged with geometric, almost obsessive precision. Delicacies from every province of the kingdom are represented, filling the air with the intoxicating aromas of grilled abalone savory, mung bean pancakes, and ginseng-infused stews. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Before the king ever lifts his chopsticks, a high-ranking court lady, the gimigangung, must taste every single dish. This wasn't just for quality control. It was an official, institutionalized poison check. It was a life-or-death necessity in a court where a bowl of your favorite soup could easily be your last. Imagine that for a job description, royal food taster. It sounds prestigious, but every meal is a high-stakes game of culinary roulette. This contrast defines your existence, a world of unimaginable luxury and staggering inequality. You walk past elegant pavilions where young princes practice calligraphy, using brushes made from the finest Siberian wolf hair, their inkstones carved from river rocks that took artisans decades to perfect. You see court ladies dabbing their faces with delicate powders made from ground rice and applying fragrant lotions from rare plant extracts. Meanwhile, you're just hoping the woven straw of your sandals doesn't completely give out before the next season. Here is a mainstream historical fact for you. The very layout of the palace was a physical manifestation of Confucian ideology. The throne hall, the king's administrative offices, and the various government ministries were all located in the Oijeon, or outer court. This was the public official and exclusively male-dominated sphere of governance. Deeper within the palace walls lay the Najeon, or inner court, the private domain of the queen, the royal concubines, and their vast retinues of female attendants. This strict separation was intended to mirror the ideal division between public politics and private domestic life. The reality, however, was that the inner court was its own political battlefield, a hotbed of intrigue and power plays that could shape the fate of the entire nation. And this is where the true danger festers. The person you need to watch most carefully isn't the grim-faced royal guard with a sword at his hip, nor is it the ambitious minister whispering in the king's ear. It's the person sleeping on the mat next to you, the one who shares your meager meals and your endless chores. Jealousy is the unofficial currency of the court. Did you receive a fleeting nod of approval from a high-ranking court lady? Did the crown prince happen to glance in your direction for a fraction of a second too long? A single misplaced word, a rumor planted in the right ear, can not only end your career, but your very existence. Historians still argue whether the suffocating formality and elaborate rituals of Joseon court life were a genuine expression of deeply held Confucian ideals, or simply a pragmatic mechanism to control thousands of ambitious, intelligent, and potentially treacherous people, all crammed into one gilded cage. Was it all about sincere reverence for the king's divine authority, or was it a clever strategy to keep everyone so bogged down in mind-numbing protocol that they had less time and energy to plot rebellion? Whatever the academic consensus, the result for you is a daily atmosphere of profound and unrelenting tension. A single misstep during a 5-hour-long ancestral rite, a bow held for a second too short a glance in the wrong direction, could be interpreted as disrespect, which could be twisted into sedition. You feel as though you've been cast in a permanent high-stakes theatrical performance, but you've been given a script written in a language you barely understand. As dusk falls, the palace transforms. Paper lanterns cast long, dancing shadows that make familiar courtyards feel alien and menacing. The bustling sounds of the day give way to the soft strum of a gaiagium from a distant chamber and the rhythmic hollow clack-clack of the night watchman's wooden clapper, a sound meant to be reassuring, but which only deepens the sense of isolation. This is the time for secrets, when clandestine messages are passed, when plots are hatched in hushed tones behind fragile paper screen doors. Lying on your thin sleeping mat, you listen to the unfamiliar sounds of the night, feeling utterly and completely alone. This palace of shining happiness already feels more like a beautiful, intricate trap, and you've only just survived your first day. You have survived your first day, and then another, and another. The initial terror has subsided into a low, constant hum of anxiety. You've learned the routines, the faces, the invisible lines you must never cross. You do your work, you keep your head down, and you listen. The palace is a library of whispers, and in the kitchens, in the laundry grounds, in the quiet moments before dawn, you begin to piece together the story of this place. You learn that the shining happiness of Gyeongbok Palace was paid for in blood, and the bill came due before the plaster was even dry on its walls. The story you hear again and again is that of the founder, the great King Taejo. But before he was a king, he was a man named Yi Seong-gye, Goryeo most formidable general. The Goryeo dynasty, which had ruled Korea for nearly 500 years, was in its twilight. It was a kingdom rotting from the inside out, plagued by corruption, internal strife, and wavering under the immense pressure of the new Ming dynasty in neighboring China. General Yi was a national hero, a man who had spent his life on the northern frontiers, fending off Yurkin raiders and Japanese pirates. He was respected by his men and feared by his enemies. He was the kind of person who seemed destined to leave a mark on history one way or another. The moment that changed everything, the story goes, happened in the year 1388 at a place called Wihwa Island on the Yalu River. The Goryeo king, manipulated by a pro-Mongol faction at court, had given General Yi an impossible order to invade the powerful Ming Empire. It was a fool's errand, a suicidal mission that would exhaust what was left of the kingdom's strength. General Yi marched his massive army north as ordered, but as his soldiers stood on the banks of the river, staring at the churning, rain-swollen waters, he made a choice. He was a patriot, but he was no fool. He would not sacrifice his men and his country for the vanity of a weak and misguided king. In what was perhaps the most consequential U-turn in Korean history, he turned his entire army around and marched them south straight back to the capital. It was the ultimate "I don't think so" moment, a strategic pivot that was less a retreat and more a declaration of intent. The coup was swift and brutally efficient. There was no protracted civil war. General Yi's army, the most powerful force in the land, met little resistance. The old king was deposed, and key officials loyal to the old dynasty were systematically purged, a polite term for arrested and executed. This wasn't just a change of leadership. It was a hostile takeover. It established a chillingly effective blueprint for handling political opposition that would be, well, let's just say it would be used again and again. Historians still debate whether Taejo was a reluctant hero, a patriot forced into a coup by a corrupt and incompetent government, or a brilliant and ruthless opportunist who saw his moment and seized it with both hands. In 1392, General Yi Seong-gi ascended the throne as King Taejo, the first ruler of the Joseon dynasty. He moved the capital from Kaesong to Hanyang, modern-day Seoul, and commissioned the construction of the very palace you now call home. A new era had begun, founded on the Confucian ideals of order, meritocracy, and benevolence. But beneath the veneer of philosophical harmony, the foundation was fractured by a very human problem family drama. King Taejo had 8 sons, a fact that would soon prove to be 7 too many. His first wife, the quiet and respected Lady Han, had borne him 6 of them. These sons, now powerful and ambitious princes, had fought alongside him. They had ridden into battle, their swords stained with the blood of his enemies. They had helped him win his kingdom. His 5th son, Yi Bangwan, was particularly instrumental, a key strategist, and a decisive force in the coup. But Lady Han, Queen Shinui, as she was posthumously named, had died just before Taejo took the throne. His current wife, Queen Sindeok, was a woman with 2 young sons of her own, and a great deal of political savvy. And here is where Taejo made his fatal error in judgment. Perhaps blinded by affection for his new wife, perhaps weary of his older son's raw ambition, the aging king listened to the counsel of Queen Sindeok and her powerful ally, the chief state counselor, Jong Dojeon. Jong was the brilliant architect of the new dynasty's legal and philosophical framework, but he also deeply distrusted the princes, seeing their private armies and immense influence as a direct threat to the stability of the new state he was trying to build. Together, they convinced Taejo to do the unthinkable. He passed over all 6 of his older battle-proven sons. He ignored their contributions, their experience, their expectations, and he named his youngest son, the child Yi Bangseok, as the crown prince and heir to the throne. It was the medieval equivalent of a CEO bypassing all his senior VPs and giving the family company to his 8-year-old half-brother because his new stepmom said the kid had a lot of potential and really great macaroni art skills. The fury among the older princes was immediate and palpable. For Yi Bangwan, it was the ultimate betrayal. He had risked everything for his father, only to be disinherited in favor of a boy who was still a child when the real fighting was done. You can almost feel the echo of that anger as you walk the palace grounds. You imagine the princes meeting in secret, their faces grim in the torchlight. The air in the palace, even years later, feels thick with their resentment. They were not about to send polite letters to the editor expressing their concerns. They were quietly updating their resumes to include extensive experience in regime change and sharpening their swords. This crisis had lasting effects. Jong Dojeon's influence, seen as a catastrophic overreach by a minister, and the queen's family created a deep-seated suspicion of powerful in-laws. In fact, a quirky tidbit of Joseon political tradition grew from this chaos. For much of the dynasty, the king's sons-in-law, the husbands of princesses, were barred from holding high government office. It was a preemptive measure to keep another ambitious family from getting too close to the levers of power. Back in the palace, as you go about your duties, you can sense the storm brewing. King Taejo is growing old and frail, increasingly lost in grief after Queen Sindeok dies suddenly. Jong Dojeon, now more exposed than ever, makes a desperate move. He pushes to have the prince's remaining private armies disbanded to strip them of their claws once and for all. For Yi Bangwan, this is the final provocation. He knows that to be disarmed is to be helpless, and to be helpless is to be dead. The shining happiness of the palace is about to be extinguished by the fires of rebellion. The new dynasty, born in a bloodless coup, is about to witness its first and perhaps most infamous bloodbath. The first strife of princes is no longer a risk. It is an inevitability. The uneasy peace you've grown accustomed to shatters on a rainy night in the 8th month of 1398. It's not a loud crack, but a sudden deep silence. The rhythmic clacking of the night watchman's clapper is absent. The familiar hum of the palace at night has vanished, replaced by a heavy, expectant stillness that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. You huddle with the other low-ranking servants in your cramped quarters, exchanging nervous glances. Everyone feels it. Something is wrong. The air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for a violence it knows is coming. The whispers you've been hearing for months have finally reached their deadly conclusion. Yi Bangwan, the ambitious fifth prince, has received word that his enemies are about to strike. Zhang Dojan, the powerful chief minister, has convinced the court that the princes must be stripped of all their power, and he plans to host a celebration to lure them into a trap where they can be killed. But Jiang has underestimated his opponent. Yi Bangwan is not an animal you corner. He is the one who sets the trap. Feigning a grave illness, he makes it known that he is too unwell to attend the party. It's the perfect alibi. While his enemies believe him to be on his deathbed, he gathers his loyal retainers, his private army, and prepares to turn the tables in the most brutal way imaginable. The first hint of trouble is a sound carried on the damp night air, a sound that doesn't belong in the orderly capital. A distant shout, sharp and desperate, quickly silenced. Then another. It's the sound of the storm breaking. Yi Bangwan's men have descended upon the villa where Zhang Dojan and his allies are feasting. You can't see the chaos, but your mind paints a terrifying picture based on the muffled screams and the faint chilling clang of steel on steel. It's a terrible way for a party to end. The worst kind of uninvited guest is always the one carrying a sharp sword and an even sharper grudge. Later, the story of Zhang Dojan's final moments will spread through the palace like wildfire. How he was found drunk and terrified, hiding in the home of a concubine. How he begged the son of his old friend and king for his life, perhaps trying to appeal to their shared history in building the new nation. But Yi Bangwan, his face, impassive in the torchlight, was unmoved. He is said to have coldly recited a line from a poem Zhang himself had once written about a lonely pine tree before giving the signal for his execution. The architect of Joseon was dead, his blueprints for the future torn to shreds. The violence doesn't stop there. It spills into the palace itself. Suddenly, the courtyards you sweep every day are filled with armed men. They are not the royal guard in their pristine uniforms. These are hard-bitten soldiers, loyal only to their prince. They move with a terrifying purpose, their boots splashing in the muddy puddles, their faces grim. You press yourself into a darkened alcove, trying to become one with the shadows, as you watch them splinter the doors of government offices, dragging out terrified officials. The meticulously constructed order of the palace dissolves into raw, terrifying chaos in a matter of minutes. Then the soldiers run towards the inner court, the sacred domestic space of the royal family. Their target, the young crown prince Yi Bangseok and his slightly older brother Yi Bangbeon. You hear the screams of court ladies as the men storm the residence of the Dowager Queen. They find the two boys, who are barely teenagers, and cut them down without hesitation. The succession problem has been solved with the edge of a sword. The throne is now vacant, cleared by fratricide. It's a fascinating and quirky psychological tidbit that, according to some accounts, while his men were carrying out this bloody purge, Yi Bangwan himself was not there. He had gone to the tomb of his mother, Queen Shinui, the wife his father had cast aside. In the midst of a violent coup, he was reportedly speaking to his mother's spirit, explaining his actions, as if seeking posthumous permission for the horrors he had unleashed. It's a chilling image, a man orchestrating a bloodbath while simultaneously trying to justify it to the ghost of his mother. The next morning, the rain has stopped, but the palace is gripped by a cold, dreadful calm. The great king Taejo, the fierce warrior who founded a dynasty, is now nothing more than a broken old man, a prisoner in his own creation. His trusted minister is dead. His two youngest and most beloved sons are dead, and the murderer is his own child. Historians still debate the exact level of King Taejo's complicity or ignorance in the events of that night. Was he completely blindsided by his son's ruthlessness, a truly tragic figure in the Shakespearean sense? Or did he, on some level, turn a blind eye, knowing that the unnatural succession he had decreed could only be resolved with blood? Yi Bang-won is far too clever to seize the throne for himself immediately. That would be too blatant, too crude. It would make him look like a tyrant. Instead, he orchestrates a piece of political theater. He approaches his terrified father and insists that his oldest surviving brother, the mild-mannered Yi Bang-gwa, should be the new crown prince. He is, after all, the next in line by age. King Taejo, utterly defeated, has no choice but to agree. Soon after, he abdicates, and Yi Bang-gwa becomes King Jeongjong, the second ruler of Joseon. It's a brilliant move. Yi Bang-won has installed a puppet, a placeholder king, who has no real taste for power. He has effectively promoted his brother to the position of king, while keeping the real title of chief executive officer for himself. The palace is quiet again. The bodies have been removed, and the blood has been scrubbed from the wooden floors and stone courtyards. But you know the stain is still there. You have survived the first strife of princes. You have seen firsthand how quickly political disagreements become deadly. And you have learned the single most important lesson for your survival in this gilded cage talk of philosophy, loyalty, and filial piety is a luxury. The only currency that truly matters is power, and the cold, hard willingness to use it against anyone, even your own blood. The reign of the puppet king, Jeongjong, is a strange, hollow time in the palace. On the surface, things have returned to normal. Ceremonies are performed, edicts are issued, and the new king presides over the court with a gentle, if somewhat vacant demeanor. But everyone from the highest minister down to you, a dustcloth-wielding attendant, knows who is really in charge. Yi Bang-won, his hands now washed of his half-brother's blood, holds the real power. He is the commander of the royal army, the king's protector, the shadow on the throne. The air remains thick with the unspoken. This fragile peace is, of course, too good to last. The Yi family, it seems, handles succession planning less like a calm boardroom meeting and more like a season finale of a particularly violent reality show. In 1400, another of Yi Bang-won's older brothers, the fourth prince, Yi Bang-gan, decides that he is not content with his position. Fueled by his own ambition and goaded by a cunning general, he makes his own bid for power. He gathers his forces and attacks his younger brother's faction, sparking what history calls the Second Strife of Princes. The conflict is laughably brief. Yi Bang-won's seasoned troops crush his brother's rebellion with ease. Yi Bang-gan is defeated and exiled, his allies executed. This second, smaller spasm of violence gives Yi Bang-won the perfect justification for what he wanted all along. His puppet, king brother Jeongjong, who likely never wanted the stressful job of monarch in the first place, promptly abdicates. He wisely concludes that the throne is far too dangerous a seat when your younger brother is this good at winning civil wars. And so, Yi Bang-won, the fifth prince, the forgotten son, the architect of two bloody coups, finally ascends the throne. He is now King Taejong. And as you feel the atmosphere in the palace shift from nervous tension to icy, disciplined fear, you know the real reign has just begun. Taejong's first order of business is to ensure that no one can ever do to him what he did to others. He immediately sets about building a system of absolute monarchy, and his first target is the very weapon he used to seize power private armies. In a sweeping, nationwide decree, he abolishes all private military forces held by princes and aristocrats. His royal army moves through the provinces, systematically confiscating swords, spears, and armor, and absorbing private soldiers into the centralized state military. This is a mainstream historical fact and a masterful act of statecraft. It breaks the back of the powerful clans and ensures the king has a monopoly on violence. But it is accomplished with the same ruthlessness that brought him to power. Any noble who hesitates or resists is immediately branded a traitor and dealt with accordingly. Once the external threats are neutralized, Taejong turns his attention inward, and this is where the true chill of his reign begins. He becomes consumed by a deep-seated paranoia, and he begins to methodically purge the very men who had been his most loyal supporters. His logic is as simple as it is terrifying. Anyone who helped him scheme his way to the top knows the playbook. Anyone who helped him betray his masters could, in theory, help someone else betray him. One by one, his closest allies, the men who had fought beside him in the strifes, are ensnared in manufactured plots. Charges of corruption, disrespect, or conspiracy suddenly appear, followed by swift arrests, brutal interrogations, and quiet executions. You see men who were sharing wine with the king one week being dragged away in chains, the next their faces masks of shocked disbelief. But his most personal and agonizing purge is reserved for his own family. Taejong's greatest fear is the power of a queen's clan, remembering all too well how Queen Sindeok had nearly cost him everything. His own wife, Queen Wangyong of the Min clan, had been his fiercest political partner. Her family's wealth and influence were critical to his success. Her two younger brothers, Min Mugu and Min Mujil, were not just his brothers-in-law. They were his chief strategists and lieutenants during the coups. Now, with him on the throne, they are the two most powerful nobles in the kingdom. And in Taejong's eyes, that makes them intolerable threats. His approach to family gatherings now seems to be better to have an empty seat at the table than a knife in the back. You witness, from the distant perspective of a servant, a slow, agonizing domestic tragedy. Taejong begins to turn on his wife's brothers. At first, it's subtle public rebukes for supposed arrogance. Then he strips them of their titles. Queen Wangyong, a proud, fierce woman who had risked everything for her husband, is forced to watch as he systematically destroys her family. She pleads with him. She rages. She reminds him of the loyalty her brother showed him when he had nothing. He listens, and he does not waver. Finally, he accuses them of plotting treason. Despite the queen's desperate protests, her brothers Min Mugu and Min Mujil are arrested and forced to drink poison. He doesn't stop there, eventually executing her other two brothers as well. He has secured his throne by breaking his wife's heart. In the midst of all this political terror, you notice a quirky habit of the new king. Taejong is obsessed with hunting. He is constantly organizing massive multi-day hunting expeditions taking a huge retinue into the mountains to chase deer and boar. His long-suffering Confucian scholar officials hate it. They flood the throne with memorials arguing that it is beneath the dignity of a king that he is neglecting state affairs and that the country needs him in the palace. But they miss the point. For Taizong, hunting wasn't just a sport. It was a military exercise, a way to keep his troops sharp and his own mind clear. More importantly, it was an escape from the suffocating paranoia of the court. He had created a place where every shadow held a potential assassin. Scholars are divided on whether Taizong's ruthlessness was born of pure, unchecked paranoia, or if it was a calculated, even necessary evil required to forge a strong and stable dynasty from the chaos that preceded it. Was he a tyrant, haunted by the ghosts of his victims, seeing betrayal in the eyes of everyone he loved? Or was he a cold and brilliant pragmatist who understood that new dynasties require a foundation of absolute, unquestionable authority, a foundation that must often be built with a mortar of blood and fear? By the end of his purges, the question is academic. King Taizong is the undisputed absolute monarch. Every potential rival is dead or exiled. Every powerful family has been humbled. All power and authority now flow directly to the throne. The palace is a model of efficiency, order, and deep abiding terror. You and everyone else who serves here have learned the ultimate lesson for survival in Taizong's court. Be loyal, be invisible, and above all, be utterly powerless. He has built a stable kingdom for his descendants, but he has filled its closets with the skeletons of his friends, his comrades, and his family. The bloody precedent is now set in stone. To protect the throne, a king must be willing to sacrifice anyone. Decades pass. The iron chill of King Taizong's reign slowly thaws, giving way to the brilliant sunshine of his son, King Sejong the Great. Sejong's era is a golden age of enlightenment, a time of peace, booming invention, and profound scholarship. You who once trembled as a youth in the terrifying court of Taizong are now old. Your hair is streaked with silver, your joints ache on cold mornings, and you have seen kings come and go like the seasons. You have watched the invention of the Korean alphabet Hangul and seen the court buzzing with scholars and astronomers instead of assassins and plotters. You allowed yourself to believe for a little while that the dynasty had outgrown its bloody beginnings. You were wrong. The golden age proves to be heartbreakingly brief. Sejong's son, the gifted King Munjong, ascends the throne. He is a scholar and an intellectual, a man more interested in astronomy and engineering than in court politics. Here's a quirky little fact for you. He was a skilled inventor in his own right, just like his father, and is credited with designing an improved, more accurate water clock, and even a standardized mobile rain gauge to better predict agricultural yields. He was a king who preferred measuring rainfall to spilling blood, a refreshing, but as it turns out tragically dangerous quality in a Joseon monarch. His reign lasts just 2 years before his frail health gives out. On his deathbed, he does the only thing a dying father can do. He entrusts his sole heir to the care of his most loyal officials. His son, Yi Honghui, becomes King Danjong at the tender age of 12. And as you look at the small, solemn boy swallowed by the cavernous throne, a cold dread washes over you. You are old enough to have seen this script before. A child on the throne is a vacuum of power, and you know that nature and ambitious uncles abhor a vacuum. The court immediately splinters into 2 factions. On one side, you have the council of esteemed scholar officials appointed by the late King Munjong, led by the powerful and respected chief state counselor Kim Jong-seo. Their sworn duty is to govern wisely and protect the boy king until he comes of age. On the other side stands the boy's uncle, his father's younger brother, Grand Prince Suyong. Suyong is everything the council is not. He is a son of Sejong the Great, a brilliant military strategist, a charismatic and physically imposing figure who bristles with an energy that feels all too familiar. In him, you see the ghost of a young Yi Bang-wan, and the sight makes you shiver. Prince Suyong begins to publicly argue that the scholar officials are usurping royal authority. He claims they are disrespecting the royal family and concentrating power in their own bureaucratic hands. He skillfully positions himself as the defender of the throne, the strong royal uncle needed to protect his helpless nephew from these scheming ministers. The palace once again divides into camps, and the corridors are filled with the familiar sound of whispers. You've heard this tune before. The palace seems to have only two operational modes: mind-numbing peacefulness or a tense, deadly game of pick a side. And you know the prize for choosing the losing side is a swift, non-negotiable trip to the afterlife. The breaking point comes on a cold night in the 10th month of 1453. Suyong decides to launch his own coup, a move that is a near-perfect echo of his grandfather Taejong's bloody seizure of power. He summons the head of his rivals, Kim Jong-seo, to his private residence, claiming he needs to urgently discuss matters of state. When the elderly minister arrives, Suyong's assassins emerge from the shadows and strike him down. The death of the chief counselor is the signal. Throughout the capital, Suyong's hidden retainers move against the other key officials on his list. The most chilling part is what happens next. Suyong, his clothes perhaps still marked by the violence, rides directly to Gyeongbok Palace. In his hand, he carries a list of names. He goes before his 12-year-old nephew, the king, and presents this list, claiming he has just uncovered a massive conspiracy and has saved the throne from a group of traitors. The boy King Danjong is pale and trembling, faced with his towering, formidable uncle, a man who has just committed murder and is now asking for his royal approval. The boy has no choice. He hands over the royal seal, effectively stamping the death warrants of the very men his own father had appointed to protect him. The purge is swift. The officials on Suyong's list are rounded up and executed without trial. Suyong now controls the entire government, having appointed himself to the vacant position of chief state counselor. He keeps up the pretense, of course, that he is merely the humble servant of the king, his loyal protector. But everyone knows the truth. You see the young King Danjong drifting through the palace halls like a ghost, a silent, powerless figurehead in his own court. All edicts, all appointments, all decisions are now made by his uncle. Historians still debate whether Suyong acted out of a genuine belief that he was saving the nation from weak civilian leadership, or from a pure, naked ambition that had been festering in his heart for years. Was he a patriot trying to restore the strength of the royal house, or was he a predator who saw a perfect opportunity to seize the power he felt was his by right? The lines are as blurry as they were for Taejong. After 2 years of this charade, Suyong's allies formally advised the young King Danjong to abdicate the throne in favor of his more capable uncle. It's one of the least voluntary resignations in history. The official record states that the boy king willingly gave up his crown for the good of the nation. In 1455, Grand Prince Suyong finally ascends the throne as King Sejong. And so you have witnessed it again. The cycle has repeated. You saw a son murder his brothers for the crown, and now You have seen an uncle steal it from his nephew. The bloody blueprint created by King Taejong was not an anomaly. It was a tradition. A deep, weary sigh escapes your old bones. You have a sinking feeling that this is not the end of the bloodshed. Seijo wears the crown, but his claim is tainted. And you know there are still men out there, men loyal to the memory of King Munjong and to the sad deposed boy king who are watching and waiting for their chance to act. A new king is on the throne, but the air in the palace has never been more suffocating. King Seijo, the former Grand Prince Suyong, is a capable and decisive ruler. But the ghost of his usurpation haunts every corridor, every edict, every silent downward glance from a court official. And there is another ghost, a living one. The deposed boy king Danjong still resides within the palace walls. He has been given the hollow title of Grand King Emeritus, a fancy name for a royal prisoner. He is a constant breathing reminder of Seijo's treachery. His very existence is a quiet challenge to the new king's authority, and as long as he lives, the embers of loyalty to the old line could at any moment be fanned into a flame. You see these embers glowing in the eyes of certain men. They are not wild-eyed radicals or ambitious generals. They are the intellectual and moral heart of the court men, known to history as the Sayuksin, the 6 martyred ministers. You know them by sight: Seong Samun, Pak Paengnon Yigai Ha Wi Jiyu Yungbu, and Yu Song Won. These are men of unimpeachable integrity, top scholars from the prestigious Hall of Worthies, the very institution that King Sejong had established. They had helped create the Korean alphabet. They had served Sejong and his son Munjong with absolute devotion. And now they look upon the usurper Seijo with a cold, principled contempt. Their loyalty to the deposed Danjong leads them to a desperate secret plot. Their plan is as daring as it is dangerous. They will assassinate King Seijo and restore Danjong to the throne. The opportunity is to be a grand state banquet held in honor of a visiting envoy from Ming China. As part of the celebration, 2 of the king's trusted generals, who are also part of the conspiracy, are scheduled to bring in a cadre of royal swordsmen to perform a ceremonial demonstration of their skills. At a prearranged signal, these swordsmen would turn on Seijo, cut him down, and the ministers would secure the palace, declare the usurpation void, and bring Danjong back to power. On the appointed day, the conspirators take their places at the banquet, their hearts pounding in their chests. But then disaster. Seijo, perhaps sensing the tension in the room, or simply making a logistical call, announces that the hall feels too crowded for the sword demonstration. He orders the royal swordsmen to be dismissed. Just like that, the central pillar of their plan crumbles. They have no choice but to abort the mission, their faces frozen in polite smiles while their minds scream in panic. It's the ultimate nightmare scenario, the 15th century equivalent of receiving a last-minute meeting canceled notification after you've already wired the building with explosives. The conspiracy, already on life support, is soon betrayed from within. One of the plotters, a man named Kim Jil, loses his nerve. He confesses the entire plan to his father-in-law, who, seeing a chance to secure his family's safety, urges him to report it to the king. A terrified Kim Jil goes before Seijo and lays the entire conspiracy bare, naming every man involved. What follows is one of the most infamous and brutal episodes in Joseon history. Seijo, his face a mask of thunderous rage, presides over the interrogations himself. He brings the 6 ministers before him, but instead of terrified confessions, he is met with breathtaking defiance. Here, we get a quirky and telling tidbit about true conviction, Seong Sam Moon. When questioned, refuses to address Seijo as Your Majesty or even King. To his face, he calls him only by his old title, Grand Prince, a stunning denial of his legitimacy. He then tells Seijo that for the past 2 years, he has refused to eat the rice stipend granted to him by the new regime. Instead, he kept the sacks of tainted rice from the usurper locked away in a storehouse, preferring to buy his own food. Enraged, Seijo orders them to be tortured. But even under the most horrific torment, their spirits are unbroken. They are seared with hot irons until the smell of their own burning flesh fills the chamber. Their limbs are broken and twisted, yet they refuse to name any other conspirators beyond the core group that was already betrayed, protecting a wider network of sympathizers with their silence. Pak Pengmyeon, another of the 6, is said to have looked Seijo in the eye during his torture and pointed out that in all the official documents he had submitted since the usurpation, he had cleverly avoided using the Chinese character for subject when referring to himself, a subtle but persistent act of rebellion. Historians continue to discuss the full extent of the conspiracy. Was it a small idealistic plot hatched by a handful of impossibly brave men? Or was it a much wider web of dissent that Seijo, through sheer terror, successfully suppressed and erased from the official records? The end for the 6 martyred ministers is gruesome. Seijo, making a brutal example of them, has them publicly executed by dismemberment. Their bodies are put on display as a terrifying warning to any who would dare defy him. But his vengeance doesn't stop with them. In a furious rage, he invokes Yonchuaje, the principle of guilt by association. He orders the extermination of their entire male lines. Fathers, sons, grandsons, brothers, uncles, and nephews are all put to death. The women of their families are stripped of their status and given as slaves to loyal officials. It was Seijo's human resources policy for handling dissent. He didn't just fire you. He fired your entire family tree, past, present, and future. This failed coup seals the tragic fate of Danjiang. Now seen as an existential threat, he is stripped of his title, demoted to the lowly rank of Prince Nosan, and exiled to a remote, desolate county. A few months later, court assassins arrive with a bowl of poison. When the 16-year-old boy refuses it, they strangle him to death in his lonely room. The last legitimate heir of King Sejong the Great is gone. You have now witnessed the bloody finale of Seijo's rise to power. The court is finally completely silent. There is no more open dissent, only the quiet, cowed submission of terrified survivors. Seijo sits securely on his throne, but it is a throne built on the bones of his righteous ministers and cemented with the blood of his own nephew. You, the old palace servant, have seen the dynasty's darkest lesson, reinforced once more. Loyalty to the right man, if he is the losing man, is a death sentence. The palace is quiet now, but it feels less like a home of kings and more like a well-managed tomb. More than 200 years have passed. The violent coups and purges of the early dynasty are now the stuff of history tales of a distant, cruder age. The palace you serve in is one of established order, of intricate, mind-numbing ritual. The old servant who witnessed Seijo's bloody rise is long gone, his bones turned to dust. You are a new fixture here. You are a young Gungyo, a court lady recently assigned to the Eastern Palace, the residence of the heir to the throne. Your world is supposed to be one of silk poetry and quiet deference. You are here to serve the crown princess, the serene and intelligent Lady Yegyong. You quickly learn, however, that the absence of open warfare does not mean peace. The bloodbaths of the past have been replaced by a quieter, more insidious kind of destruction, the slow, methodical breaking of a mind. The current ruler is King Yongjo, one of Joseon's longest reigning monarchs. He is brilliant, diligent, and a micromanager of epic proportions. He is also a severe and unforgiving father. Yongjo's own path to the throne was clouded by rumors that he had poisoned his older brother, and this shadow has made him obsessed with proving his legitimacy through flawless Confucian conduct. He sees his only son, Crown Prince Sado, not as a child to be nurtured, but as a vessel for his own legacy, a project to be perfected. Your mistress, Lady Yegyong, was married to the prince when they were both just 9 years old. You serve her as she navigates a life of impossible pressure, a life she would later document in her heartbreaking memoirs, the Hanjungnok. From your quiet corner, you witness the central tragic dynamic of this court, the strained and increasingly toxic relationship between the king and his son. Prince Sado was by all accounts a child prodigy, intelligent, handsome, and athletic. But King Yongjo's method of parenting is relentless criticism. In full view of the court, he will thunder at his son for the slightest mistake, a misremembered line from a classic text, a moment of fidgeting during a ceremony. You watch the prince wither under these public humiliations, his youthful confidence slowly eroding, replaced by a deep-seated fear of his own father. The prince's anxiety begins to manifest in strange, alarming ways. This is where you see the first signs of his unraveling. He develops a set of crippling phobias, a quirky and tragic tidbit from the historical record. His terror of thunder is so profound that he will faint or hide for hours after a storm. More bizarrely, he develops an obsession with his clothing, a condition that goes far beyond princely vanity. You watch as he lays out dozens of silk robes for the day, unable to make a decision. If a single garment has a minor wrinkle or doesn't feel right, he flies into a terrifying rage, ordering the offending robe to be burned on the spot. This isn't a fashion emergency. It's a symptom of a mind at war with itself. The prince's morning routine makes choosing an outfit for a first date look like a calm, rational process. This is the central horror of your new life, the suffocating need to maintain a perfect facade. Lady Hyegyong, your mistress, must manage her husband's increasingly erratic behavior while presenting a mask of serene contentment to the court, especially to her terrifying father-in-law. You and the other attendants become co-conspirators in this deception. You learn to brew calming medicinal teas. You discreetly dispose of heaps of fine scorched silk. You learn to anticipate the prince's moods to clear away anything that might trigger an outburst. The palace is no longer a physical battlefield. It is a psychological one, and the weapons are disapproving glances, impossible expectations, and the weight of unspoken truths. Historians and psychologists still debate the precise nature of Sado's mental illness. Was it a condition we might now label as bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, something rooted in his biology? Was it a severe form of complex PTSD induced by his father's relentless psychological abuse? Or was it an inseparable combination of both a vulnerable mind placed into the crucible of the Joseon court and crushed by the pressure? From your vantage point, you don't have a name for it. You only have fear. The prince's condition worsens. His dark moods give way to violent rages. He begins to strike the eunuchs and court ladies who serve him. An inkstone, a writing brush, anything at hand can become a weapon. The Eastern Palace, once the hopeful home of the next king, becomes a place of silent, creeping terror. You learn to walk silently, to make yourself small, to read the flicker in the prince's eyes that signals an impending storm. To speak of the prince's madness outside these walls is unthinkable. It would be treason. It would mean death for you and ruin for your mistress. And so, everyone participates in the silent scream, pretending that everything is normal while living in mortal fear of the heir to the throne. It is the ultimate Joseon version of the "this is fine" meme, where the room is on fire, but you are smiling politely and commenting on the lovely floral arrangement. The situation is becoming untenable. Prince Sado is now completely estranged from his father. King Yongjo no longer sees a beloved son, but a monstrous, terrifying failure. Whispers of the prince's violence, once contained within your palace walls, are beginning to leak out. Lady Hyegyong is trapped in an impossible position, trying to protect her children and her staff from her husband, trying to protect herself, and yet on some level, still trying to protect her broken husband from the judgment of the world and the terrible wrath of his father. The tension has been stretched to the breaking point. The quiet psychological horror is about to curdle into a real physical one. Something unprecedented, something unimaginably awful is about to happen. It is the peak of a blisteringly hot and humid summer in the year 1762. The air is so thick you can taste it, and the drone of cicadas is a constant maddening hum. The tension in the Eastern Palace, which has been stretched taut for years, finally snaps. The exact trigger is lost to a flurry of panicked contradictory accounts. Perhaps the prince, in a delusional rage, tried to climb the walls into the king's private quarters. Perhaps he uttered a threat against one of his own children. Whatever the final provocation, it is enough. King Yongjo, his face a mask of cold, absolute fury, decides that the monster he has created must be unmade. He doesn't send the royal guard to arrest his son for treason. He doesn't send an assassin with a silken cord or a physician with a bowl of poison. He does something far more personal and far more terrifying. He comes himself. You are with Lady Hyegyong. When the king storms into the courtyard, his voice not loud, but resonating with a terrifying power that cuts through the thick summer air. He confronts his son not as a king, addressing a subject, but as a father disowning his child. He lists Sado's sins, the unhinged violence, the murder of palace staff, the debauchery, the utter failure to live up to the Confucian ideal. He declares him unfit to live, unfit to be his son. Then, in a display of twisted Confucian piety, he orders Crown Prince Sado to take his own life. To have him officially executed as a criminal would taint the entire family line. It would make Sado's son, your mistress's child, the young Yi-san, the son of a traitor, a stain that could delegitimize his future claim to the throne. To preserve the purity of the succession, Sado must die by his own hand. The prince, his bravado shattered, weeps and begs for his life, prostrating himself on the dusty ground. He attempts a clumsy suicide with the sash of his own robe, but is quickly stopped. His pleas for mercy fall on deaf ears. And this is when King Yongjo delivers the most infamous order in the history of the dynasty. His eyes fall upon a large, heavy wooden box sitting in the courtyard. It's a grain chest, a container roughly 4 feet by 4 feet, designed for storing rice. He points a trembling finger at it and commands his son, the heir to the throne of Joseon, to climb inside. You watch frozen in a state of surreal horror as the crown prince, a grown man, is forced to crawl into the cramped, dark space. The heavy lid is slammed shut. The latch is thrown. The king's eunuchs bring a hammer and nails, sealing the lid tight before piling heavy rocks on top for good measure. A new time-out method has just been introduced at court, and it seems designed to be brutally effective and permanent. The 8 days that follow are a slow, agonizing descent into hell. You and the other attendants are trapped in a nightmare, forced witnesses to a slow-motion execution. The entire court holds its breath. Under the relentless blaze of the summer sun, the rice chest becomes a coffin, an oven. For the first day or two, you can hear the prince's desperate, muffled shouts, his pleas for mercy, the horrifying sound of his fingernails scratching and splintering against the thick wooden planks. Your mistress, Lady Haegyong, locks herself in her chambers, her silent grief a tangible presence in the palace. The sounds from the chest grow weaker. They turn from screams to whimpers to hoarse moans. Whispers circulate among the terrified servants, carrying a grotesque and quirky tidbit of survival that the prince, maddened by thirst in the suffocating heat, cupped his hands to drink his own urine, a desperate act that kept him alive for another day or two. The horror is unimaginable. During these agonizing days, the most contentious debate in Joseon history is forged, one that centers on your mistress. Was Lady Haegyong's final desperate plea to the king, in which she confirmed Sado's madness and supported his removal, a righteous act to save the dynasty and her son from a violent tyrant? Or was it a calculated act of self-preservation, a terrible choice to sacrifice her husband in order to secure her own survival and her son's path to the throne? Looking at her ravaged face, you see only the profound and bottomless grief of a woman trapped by impossible circumstances. On the 8th day, there is only silence. The cicadas drone on indifferent. The sun beats down on the courtyard on the silent wooden box. Finally, King Yongjo, his face unreadable, gives the command. The chest is unsealed. The lid is pried open. Inside, the prince is dead. In the aftermath, the king expresses a great theatrical sorrow. He restores his son's title of crown prince and grants him the posthumous name by which he will forever be known, Sado, meaning to think of with sorrow. It is a shockingly hollow gesture of remorse from the man who was both judge and executioner. The king's final performance review for his son had been unforgiving, and the exit interview was, to put it mildly, brief. You have now witnessed the dynasty's most notorious bloodletting. It was not a coup for political power, but a father's horrifying solution to a son he had systematically broken. You look at your mistress, a widow at 26. You look at her son, the young Prince Yisan, who has just lost his father in the most traumatic way imaginable. He is now the undisputed heir. The immediate horror is over, but the trauma has been branded onto the next generation. You look at this solemn, intelligent boy and wonder how anyone who has witnessed such a thing can ever rule. The bloodbaths of this dynasty, you now understand, are not just about swords and poison. They are about the wounds, deep and festering, that are passed down from father to son. The slow, psychological implosion of Crown Prince Sado is a uniquely horrifying chapter in Joseon's history. But the story of a royal mind breaking under the weight of family trauma was not by any means a one-time event. To understand the true depths of the dynasty's potential for madness, we must step backwards in time. Forget the stifling summer heat of 1762. We are now traveling nearly 300 years earlier to the close of the 15th century. You are no longer the servant of a tragic princess. You are now a mid-level official, a courtier, serving a new king who at first seems capable and fair. But you are about to witness how personal trauma, when combined with absolute power, can unleash a reign of terror that makes all previous bloodbaths seem almost restrained. You are in the court of King Yeonsangun. His story, like Sado's, begins with his mother. His mother was deposed Queen Yun, a consort of the previous King Seongjong. She was known for her beauty, but also for a fierce, consuming jealousy. In a fit of rage during an argument, she did the unthinkable. She physically struck the king, leaving a scratch mark on his royal face. In a court built on the bedrock of Confucian hierarchy, this was an act of shocking rebellion. Under immense pressure from his own mother, the formidable Queen Insu and his scholar officials, King Seongjong, was forced to first depose Queen Yun, and then a few years later, to secretly order her execution by poison. Their son, the young prince Yeonsan, was raised in the palace without ever knowing the true violent fate of his mother. For the first few years of his reign, things are relatively stable. Yeonsangun rules as expected, but he is a brooding, intense figure, and a secret is festering. The turning point comes when a sycophantic official seeking to curry favor and eliminate his own rivals reveals the entire story to the king. He tells Yeonsangun everything: his mother's deposition, the officials who argued for her death, the grim details of her final moments with a bowl of poison. This revelation acts as a key turning a lock in the king's mind, unlocking a chamber of horrors that will soon spill out and drown the entire court. The result is the infamous Gapja Sawa of 1504, the second literati purge, one of the most savage and vengeful episodes the dynasty would ever see. This is not a purge to consolidate power or eliminate a political threat. This is pure, unadulterated revenge. Yeonsangun launches a massive, bloody investigation into his mother's death from 2 decades prior. Anyone who was even remotely involved becomes a target. Officials who had voiced support for the execution palace guards, who had delivered the poisoned scholars who had remained silent, all are dragged from their homes. The punishments are marked by a sadistic cruelty that shocks even a court accustomed to violence. Men are flogged to death in the palace courtyard. They are beheaded, their heads put on pikes. They are methodically dismembered. But Yeonsangun's rage extends beyond the living. In a final act of desecration, he orders that the graves of the officials involved, who are already long dead, be dug up. Their coffins are splintered open, and their rotting corpses are brought out to be publicly decapitated and mutilated. Yeonsangun's new policy for resolving conflicts with his deceased opponents was groundbreaking. Literally, after this initial storm of blood with his mother's enemies annihilated, Yeonsangun's sanity completely unravels. His rule descends into a bizarre and terrifying tyranny. This is where you get a truly quirky and telling tidbit about his reign. He seizes the Seongyungwan, the National Confucian Academy, the most sacred institution of learning in the entire kingdom, and converts it into his personal pleasure palace. He summarily evicts the nation's top scholars and replaces them with thousands of young women and girls called Hyungcheong, who were forcibly recruited from every province to serve as his personal entertainers. He fills the hallowed lecture halls with musicians, dancers, and his own personal harem. The university's curriculum was abruptly changed from Confucian classics to advanced debauchery 101. Historians debate whether Yeonsangun was a born sadist who simply found a convenient outlet for his cruelty, or if the revelation of his mother's tragic death truly did fracture his psyche, transforming him from a functional, if severe, king into a vengeful monster. Was his mother's story the genuine cause of his madness, or just the excuse he used to unleash it? For you living through it, the academic question is irrelevant. You are simply trying to survive. The king, hosts lavish, drunken banquets that last for days, draining the royal treasury. He seizes homes, farms, and mountains for his personal hunting grounds. When a poster criticizing him appears written in the common Korean alphabet, he bans the use of Hangul and executes anyone suspected of writing it. He forces his terrified officials to wear a sash that reads, "A mouth is a door that lets in disaster. A tongue is a sword that can cut off a head." It was the Joseon version of a corporate motivational poster, but with a significantly more threatening vibe. Every day is a new terrifying whim. Yeon Sang-gun has purged the court of anyone with the courage or integrity to advise him, replacing them with craven opportunists who flatter his every move. The nation's finances are in ruins, and the government is paralyzed. You can feel the resentment building not just in the palace, but across the entire country. The silent screaming that defined Sado's tragedy was a contained implosion. Yeon Sang-gun's madness is a volcanic eruption, burying the entire nation in its toxic ash. A coup is no longer just a possibility among scheming elites. It has become a national necessity. The only question is when. The reign of the tyrant Yeon Sang-gun could not last. In 1506, a coalition of officials, horrified by his madness and the ruin he had brought to the country, staged a swift and mercifully bloodless coup. Yeon Sang-gun was deposed and exiled to a remote island, and his more stable half-brother was placed on the throne as King Yeongjong. It seemed like a victory for reason and responsibility. The scholar officials had stood up to a tyrant and won. But if you, as a courtier of this era, thought this would usher in a new age of political harmony, you were about to be sorely disappointed. The problem wasn't just a single bad king. The entire political system was a powder keg, and the era of the great literati purges, the Sahwa, was just getting started. To survive in this period, you have to understand that court politics was a full-contact sport played between two rival teams. On one side, you have the Hungu faction, the established elite. These are the old money families, powerful aristocrats whose ancestors had helped found the dynasty or usurp the throne. They hold vast tracts of land, have deep connections at court, and tend to be pragmatic, if often corrupt, in their exercise of power. On the other side, you have the Sarim faction, the scrappy up-and-comers. These are largely scholars from the rural gentry idealistic Neo-Confucian purists who believe the Hungu have betrayed the philosophical foundations of the dynasty. They are rigid moralists, convinced that the court is a den of corruption, that only they can cleanse. Now imagine you are a brilliant young scholar. You've just passed the grueling civil service exam and arrived in the capital eager to serve the king and improve the lives of the people. You quickly realize that your policy ideas matter far less than your choice of lunch table in the government cafeteria. Are you a Hungu willing to work within the entrenched system? Or are you a Sarim determined to burn it all down in the name of principle? Your political affiliation was more important than your resume. Welcome to the most toxic work environment imaginable, where a bit of gossip by the royal water cooler could lead to your entire department being lethally restructured. The two purges under Yeon Sang-gun, it turns out, were just the second and third acts of a four-part tragedy. The first literati purge had actually happened years earlier in 1498. The Hungu faction, annoyed by a Sarim historian who included a critical account of King Sejo's usurpation in the official court records, convinced Yeon Sang-gun that it was an insult to his royal lineage. The king ever sensitive to slights, obliged by purging the offending scholars. After the coup against Yeonsangun, the Sarim scholar, Jo Gwangjo, rose to immense power under the new king. He pushed for radical reforms, infuriating the Hungu Old Guard. They hatched a bizarre and brilliant plot, writing "Joe will be king" in honey on mulberry leaves. Caterpillars ate along the honeyed lines, etching the treasonous phrase into the foliage as if by supernatural means. They presented these leaves to the paranoid King Jungjong, who, terrified by the omen, launched the Third Literati Purge in 1519, executing Zhou Guangzhou and his followers. The final purge in 1545 was a sordid affair sparked by a succession rivalry between two factions of the new king's maternal in-laws. The ongoing debate among historians is whether these purges were primarily driven by deep philosophical disagreements about the true nature of Confucian governance, or if ideology was just a convenient and noble-sounding excuse for naked, brutal power grabs between rival political clans. Was this truly a battle for the soul of the nation, or just Game of Thrones with more poetry and less armor? The constant threat of these purges led to a quirky political phenomenon, the rise of the mountain and forest scholar. Many principled Sarim scholars, disgusted by the corruption and danger of the capital, would preemptively resign their posts and retreat to their countryside estates. There, they would establish private academies, teach disciples, and maintain their moral authority by writing scathing critiques of the government from a safe distance. It was the ultimate Joseon form of quiet quitting to avoid a boss who might literally kill you. For those who stayed, survival was a tightrope walk. You watch as your faction gains the king's favor. Life is good, promotions are frequent. Then disaster. A senior member of your group makes a political misstep or offends a royal consort. The rival faction seizes the moment. They submit a formal accusation to the throne, not just against the individual, but against your entire group, decrying you as a clique of conspirators plotting treason. The king, his paranoia honed by generations of backstabbing, believes them. Before you know it, guards are at your door. You're dragged before the state tribunal for interrogation, which is just a polite word for torture. The best-case scenario is exile to a remote, fever-ridden island. The worst case is execution, the ruin of your family for 3 generations, and the erasure of your name from the records. Job security was fluid. This endless cycle of infighting had devastating consequences. While the best and brightest minds of Joseon were laser-focused on destroying each other, the nation's defenses were neglected, and the government was frequently paralyzed. Eventually, the Sarim faction did win out and take control of the court near the end of the 16th century. Their first order of business, they immediately split into new sub-factions, the Easterners and the Westerners, and picked up the fight right where they left off. You learn a crucial lesson. The deadliest threat in the Joseon palace wasn't always a tyrant on the throne or poison in your food. More often than not, it was the man sitting next to you at the morning assembly, smiling politely while sharpening a political knife just for you. The great purges and bloody coups eventually fade into a more stable, if not entirely peaceful, political landscape. But the impulse to eliminate one's rivals did not disappear. It simply became more subtle. The sword was replaced by the soup spoon. The executioner's block was traded for the medicine cabinet. And to understand this quiet, insidious form of warfare, you must now imagine yourself in one of the most prestigious and, without a doubt, most perilous jobs in the entire kingdom. You have spent a lifetime studying, memorizing thousands of herbs, mastering the delicate art of acupuncture, and passing the grueling state medical exam. You are now An iwi, a royal physician. You came to the palace believing your purpose was to heal. You learn on your first day that your primary purpose is to avoid being executed. Your life is a constant nerve-shredding tightrope walk. Every royal illness, from a mild cold to a passing stomach ache, is a political crisis in miniature. If your royal patient recovers, you might receive a bolt of silk or a bag of rice as a reward. If the patient dies of an obvious and unavoidable natural cause, you might be blamed for incompetence and face disgrace or exile. But if the patient dies under any circumstances that are even remotely suspicious, you, the physician who prepared their final dose of medicine, will be the first person they drag to the interrogation chamber. Your job performance review is essentially a binary choice: success or execution. There isn't a lot of room for constructive feedback. You quickly learn that poison in the Joseon Palace is rarely the dramatic foaming at the mouth affair you might imagine. It is an art of subtlety. The goal is plausible deniability. A minuscule amount of a toxic root ground up and added to a daily health tonic over months, slowly weakening the heart. A mineral salt that mimics the symptoms of dysentery. The aim is to create a death that looks natural, a death that an attending physician might diagnose as a tragic but ordinary illness. Your job is therefore twofold. You must try to cure the patient while simultaneously trying to determine if the symptoms are from God or from a rival political faction. It's an almost impossible task. Let us consider the famous and deeply suspicious case of King Yeongjong in 1724. Yeongjong had always been a sickly and frail ruler, and his political position was weak. His energetic and ambitious younger half-brother, Prince Yeoning, the man who would later become King Yeongjo, the father of Crown Prince Sado, was the favored choice of a powerful rival faction. One autumn day, King Yeongjong fell violently ill after eating a meal of marinated raw crabs, a dish famously risky for anyone with a delicate constitution. He was suffering from severe vomiting and diarrhea. This is where Prince Yeoning, his loving brother, insisted on getting involved in the medical treatment. He argued forcefully that the royal physicians should give the king a large dose of ginseng. Now, you as a physician would feel a cold sweat bead on your forehead at this suggestion. Ginseng is a powerful heating agent in traditional medicine. Administering a strong heating agent to a patient suffering from a severe foodborne illness is, to put it mildly, a controversial prescription. But the prince, the future king, was insistent. The physicians, caught between their medical judgment and immense political pressure, administered the ginseng. The king's condition immediately worsened. Undeterred, the prince then recommended another heating remedy. A few hours later, King Yeongjong was dead. The court erupted. Was it the spoiled crabs? Was it the king's chronic poor health? Or was it the ginseng, a cure so ill-advised it looked like a murder weapon administered at the insistence of the one man who stood to gain everything from the king's death? Historians fiercely debate whether King Yeongjong's death was a tragic case of medical malpractice fueled by political pressure or a brilliantly disguised assassination orchestrated by his half-brother. Prince Yeoning, as King Yeongjo, would spend the next 52 years of his reign vehemently fighting the accusation that he had murdered his brother. To counter this constant threat, the court employed its own famous, if flawed, security measure. This is a quirky tidbit you see every day. Before the king takes a single bite of his meal, A young court lady will dip a pair of polished silver chopsticks into every dish. The theory is that the silver will instantly tarnish and turn black if it touches poison. And for a few specific sulfur-based compounds like arsenic sulfide, it actually worked. But for the vast majority of deadly botanical and mineral poisons, the silver would remain perfectly bright and shiny. It was a piece of high-stakes security theater. Relying on a silver spoon to keep you safe here was like using a screen door to stop a typhoon. This brings us back to your daily terror. Every time you prepare a decoction of herbs, your hands tremble just slightly. You document every single ingredient, its weight, its origin. You have other physicians witness and countersign your prescriptions. When you kneel to offer the steaming bowl of medicine to a royal, your heart pounds against your ribs. You scan their face for any sign of gratitude or displeasure, knowing your life hangs in the balance of their digestion. The most important tool in your medical kit isn't your set of acupuncture needles. It's a rock-solid, verifiable alibi. You are surrounded by death and suspicion. A courtier can be purged for his political beliefs, a general for his ambition. But you, the royal physician, can be executed for a case of indigestion. The lines between healing and homicide are deliberately blurred by those who seek power because it makes you the perfect scapegoat. Your medical knowledge is your greatest skill, but it is also the very thing that makes you so dangerous to your enemies and so disposable to your king. In the Joseon palace, the hand that offers the cure is always the first one suspected of having delivered the poison. You have seen how the men of the court, the ministers, the scholars, the generals destroy each other with accusations of treason and factional purges. You have seen how the physicians walk a tightrope where a single medical mistake can be twisted into a charge of murder by poison. But to see the full picture of this gilded cage, you must now turn your attention away from the outer court of men and politics and look deeper into the very heart of the palace. You must enter the Najon, the inner court, the world of women. Forget being a low-level attendant or a terrified physician. You have survived. You are now a sangung, a senior court lady of the 5th rank. You've been in the palace since you were a girl, and through decades of discipline and flawless etiquette, you have earned a position of respect and authority. Your robes are of a finer silk now, and you have junior ladies named whom you must train. Your job is to teach them how to serve, but more importantly, how to survive. And the first lesson is this: the wars fought in the inner court are silent, but they are every bit as deadly as those fought outside. The entire world of the Najian revolves around a single gravitational center, the king. For a royal concubine, the goal is to capture and hold his affection. For the queen, it is to maintain her supreme status as the official consort and mother of the nation. And for the thousands of ordinary court ladies like the ones you train, there is always the faint, tantalizing, and incredibly dangerous possibility of catching the king's eye and receiving royal favor, an event that could elevate a woman from a servant to a royal consort overnight. This singular focus creates an atmosphere of intense, unspoken competition. The weapons on this battlefield are not made of steel. They are woven from whispers and rumors. They are forged in feigned illnesses and crocodile tears. They are sharpened with strategically deployed secrets about a rival's family or accusations of using black magic to cause infertility. A misplaced word at a tea gathering, a subtle slight in the deep bows, exchanged in a corridor, a rumor planted with the right eunuch. These are the daggers of the inner court. You find yourself overseeing what is essentially the original cast of a royal reality show. but the person voted off the island is often exiled or forced to drink poison. There is no more famous or dramatic example of this than the story of Yang Huibin. You tell her story to your charges as a cautionary tale. She began as Zhang Okjong, a court lady from a minor family, but a woman of almost supernatural beauty and charm. She caught the eye of King Sukjong, a ruler known for his passionate but notoriously fickle nature. He became utterly infatuated. She rose swiftly through the ranks of the royal concubines, earning the title Huibin, or Royal Consort Hui. Her ambition was as boundless as her beauty. Her power soared when she gave birth to a son, the future King Gyeongjong, the very one whose death you learned about earlier. Having an heir gave her immense leverage. The official wife, Queen Inhyun, was childless and belonged to a political faction that opposed Zhang Huibin's supporters. With the backing of her political allies and the complete devotion of the king, Zhang Huibin did the unthinkable. She and her faction managed to have Queen Inhyun deposed and exiled. Then, in a move that shocked the court to its core, King Sukjong elevated his favorite concubine to the position of queen. A former court lady now sat on the throne. Her victory, however, was a fragile one. The king's obsessive love began to cool. He was impulsive, and perhaps he began to regret casting aside his gentle and dignified first wife. Queen Inhyun's political faction worked tirelessly behind the scenes, pressuring the king and waiting for Yang Huibin to make a mistake. After a few years, they succeeded. King Sukjong, in a stunning reversal, deposed Queen Zhang and restored Queen Inhyun. Zhang Huibin was demoted back to her original rank of concubine. The king's personnel management style involved a lot of dramatic firings and even more dramatic rehirings. The final act of the tragedy came a few years later, when the restored Queen Inhyun died suddenly of a mysterious illness. An investigation, likely pushed by Zhang Huibin's enemies, allegedly discovered a shamanistic altar hidden in her rival's living quarters. They claimed Zhang Huibin had been using black magic commissioning shamans to shoot arrows into an effigy of the queen to cause her death. Enraged King Sukjong ordered his former favorite to die by poison. To this day, historians debate whether Zhang Huibin was a ruthlessly ambitious femme fatale who truly practiced witchcraft to destroy her rival, or a brilliant political operator who was ultimately framed and destroyed by the opposing faction after she lost the king's protection. You use her story to teach your girls about the consequences of failure. When a high-ranking woman falls, her entire staff falls with her. And here, you can share a quirky and brutal tidbit about palace punishment. For a court lady accused of a lesser crime, a fate more terrifying than a quick death was demotion to Musuri. A Musuri was the lowest of the low, a female slave who performed the harshest manual labor, hauling endless buckets of water from the well-scrubbing laundry in the freezing winter streams. For a Gungnyo, an educated woman who had lived a life of refined, if restricted privilege, this was a complete social and psychological annihilation. It was to be rendered a non-person. You look at the young, hopeful faces of the junior court ladies in your charge. You drill into them the rules of survival. Be observant but invisible. Be flawless in your duties, but never so flawless that you attract attention. Show loyalty only to the institution, never to an individual favorite who could be gone tomorrow. The inner court, you tell them, is a beautiful garden, but every flower has thorns, and the prettiest blossoms are often the most poisonous. The king's affection is a ray of sunshine that can burn you to ash, and a whispered word from a woman in silk can be far deadlier than a general's sword. For centuries, the reasons you might die in the palace were, if nothing else, predictable. You could be killed for backing the wrong prince, for belonging to the wrong political faction, for being born into the wrong family, or for giving the king a stomachache after he ate questionable seafood. The dangers were political, personal, and dynastic. But as the 18th century bleeds into the 19th, a new and even more insidious threat to your survival appears. It is not a person or a plot. It is an idea. And in a society built on monolithic ideology, a new idea is the most dangerous thing of all. You are a traditional scholar official, a man of letters, who believes deeply in the foundational principles of the state. Your world is governed by the rigid, harmonious order of Neo-Confucianism. It dictates your relationship with your family, your duty to the state, and your reverence for the king as the Son of Heaven. It is the bedrock of civilization itself. Then you start to hear whispers among your colleagues about a strange new set of beliefs trickling in from China, a so-called Western learning, or Seohawk. And here is a truly quirky tidbit about this faith's arrival. It wasn't brought by missionaries with wide-brimmed hats and foreign faces. It was a homegrown intellectual movement. It began with your own people, with curious scholars on diplomatic missions to Beijing. They brought back books written by Jesuit missionaries in the Chinese court books on astronomy, mathematics, and science, and bundled with them texts on their religion, Catholicism. Back in Korea, scholars began studying these books in private, not as converts, but as intellectuals. But the ideas were potent. From these texts alone, they essentially taught themselves the tenets of the faith. They had a church before they ever met a priest. At first, you and your colleagues are intrigued by the science. But when you learn the core principles of the religion, intrigue turns to horror. These Catholics preach of a single universal God in heaven, who is above all earthly rulers. This means the king is not the Son of Heaven. It's a direct challenge to his divine authority. Far worse, they refuse to perform the ancestral rites, the sacred Jesus ceremonies, that are the very cornerstone of Confucian filial piety. They call the memorial tablets for your parents and grandparents mere wood, and the offerings of food a form of idol worship. To the Joseon establishment, this is not just a different religious opinion. It is a metaphysical treason. It is an attack on the family, the state, and the sacred spirits of your ancestors. Refusing to bow to your great-grandfather's memorial tablet was seen as the ultimate rebellion, like spitting on the flag while burning the Constitution. The court's reaction is initially uncertain. A few kings, like the brilliant King Jongjo, are tolerant, more interested in the Western science than threatened by the theology. But to the hardline Confucian officials, this new faith is a cancer. Sporadic arrests and a few executions occur. The religion is banned, but like a river forced underground, it continues to spread, flowing from the educated elites to commoners, merchants, and women who find its message of universal equality before God deeply compelling. The real bloodbath begins in 1801. King Jongjo dies, and the government falls under the control of a deeply conservative dowager queen and her political faction. They see the growing Catholic movement as the perfect excuse to launch a massive purge of their political rivals, many of whom had been part of Jongjo's more tolerant circle. This becomes the Xinyu persecution, the first systematic nationwide effort to eradicate the faith. The horror is swift and absolute. You watch as scholars you once debated poetry with are dragged from their homes in the middle of the night. Entire families are implicated. The executions are designed for maximum terror. Catholic leaders are taken to public crossroads and beheaded, their heads left on poles as a gruesome warning to the populace. The message is unmistakable. This is the fate of those who betray the ancestors and the king. In the midst of this terror comes the infamous Huang Sayong Silk letter incident. A Catholic leader hiding in a clay pot in the countryside painstakingly writes a long letter on a narrow sheet of silk. It details the horrors of the persecution, and he tries to have it smuggled to the bishop in Beijing. In the letter, he makes a desperate, fatal plea. He asks the church to petition the Chinese emperor for help, or even more radically, to persuade Western nations to send an army and a fleet of warships to force Joseon to grant religious freedom. The letter is intercepted. The court is thrown into an absolute frenzy. To them, this is the ultimate proof. Catholicism isn't just a vile heresy. It's a treasonous conspiracy to bring foreign armies onto sacred Korean soil. Requesting foreign military intervention because you're having a bad time with your government is generally not a good survival strategy. The persecutions intensify tenfold. Historians debate whether the persecutions were primarily a religious phenomenon driven by genuine ideological horror, or a political one with conservative factions using the Catholic threat as a convenient and potent excuse to purge their more progressive political opponents. Standing in the court, you realize a terrifying new variable has been added to the equation of survival. For centuries, you could be killed for your political loyalties, your family connections, or your professional competence. Now, you can be executed for the contents of your own soul. You can be tortured for a book you read in the privacy of your own home. The bloodbaths of Joseon have always been about loyalty, but the definition has been dangerously expanded. It is no longer enough to be loyal to the king. You must now demonstrate absolute adherence to a single state-sanctioned way of thinking. Any deviation is a disease in the body politic that must be cauterized with fire and steel. You look around at the faces of your fellow officials and realize there is one more thing to be deathly afraid of: the hope for a different world. The fear that once dripped like slow poison through the palace corridors has now spilled outside the walls and floods the entire nation. It is the mid-1860s, and the threat is no longer just a banned book or a secret prayer meeting. It has a face and a form. You see it from the shores near the capital, hulking, smoke-belching black ships from France, from America, from Russia, appearing on the horizon like sea monsters from a nightmare. They come demanding trade treaties and access to a nation that wants nothing more than to be left alone. The Western learning you once feared as a heresy has become the vanguard of Western imperialism. The dynasty is weak, the court is paralyzed by corruption, and the world is pounding on the door. Into this power vacuum steps one of the most formidable, complex, and controversial figures in Korean history, the Joseon Daewanggun, the Grand Internal Prince. He is not the king, but his young son Gojong sits on the throne, so as the father of the monarch, he will rule as regent, with an authority more absolute than any king has wielded in centuries. And here is a quirky and essential tidbit about the man. For years, you and every other citizen of the capital knew him as a royal joke. He came from an impoverished and obscure branch of the Yi family, and to survive in a court dominated by the powerful Undong Kim clan, who had a nasty habit of purging any potential royal rivals, he played the part of a hopeless drunken buffoon. You would have seen him crashing aristocratic parties, begging for a cup of wine, and generally acting like a good-for-nothing wastrel. It was a brilliant decades-long performance of incompetence. Everyone underestimated him, and that was precisely his plan. His survival strategy was the 19th century equivalent of playing dead, but with more cheap wine and terrible off-key singing. The moment his son takes the throne, the mask of the fool is dropped, revealing a face of pure iron. The transformation is terrifying and total. His first act is to utterly shatter the power of the aristocratic maternal clans that had been bleeding the country dry for decades. He purges them from high office, dismantles their networks, and closes their private academies, which had been centers of political power. He launches sweeping reforms to strengthen the central government, and he begins the massive, ruinously expensive project of rebuilding Gyeongbok Palace to its original splendor, a symbol of renewed royal authority. He pays for it all with crushing new taxes, earning the hatred of both the aristocracy he has dispossessed and the common people he is squeezing dry. His gaze then turns to the threat that obsesses him most: Catholicism. He sees the religion as a fifth column, a traitorous allegiance to a foreign power. In 1866, he unleashes the Byongin persecution, the single largest and most brutal anti-Catholic purge in Joseon's history. Thousands of Korean converts and critically 9 French missionary priests who had been living and preaching in secret are arrested. They are taken to the sandy banks of the Han River near the capital and publicly beheaded. The execution of French citizens provokes the response the Daewongun has been preparing for. A French naval fleet sails up the river and attacks Gangwon Island, the gateway to the capital. The Daewongun rallies the army and the people, and in a stunning upset, the poorly equipped Joseon forces manage to drive the French back to the sea. A few years later, after a conflict over an American merchant ship, the United States sends its own powerful naval expedition. And again, after fierce fighting, the Americans are forced to withdraw. The Daewongun becomes a national hero, the savior who single-handedly defeated 2 Western powers. His policy of absolute isolation seems triumphantly vindicated. His foreign policy was basically the world's most violent and effective no-soliciting sign. To ensure his philosophy is literally set in stone, he orders the erection of Chokwabi stone stelae in major towns throughout the nation. You see them every time you go to the market, a stark and chilling reminder of the regent's will. The inscription is unambiguous. To engage in peace with the Western barbarians is to sell out the country. To tolerate their learning is to bring ruin to the nation. Historians remain divided, viewing him either as Joseon's last great patriot, a fierce reformer who tried to strengthen a decaying dynasty and protect its sovereignty from the jaws of imperialism, or as a reactionary tyrant whose violent xenophobia ultimately doomed the nation by preventing it from modernizing when it might have had a chance. Was he the shield that protected Joseon, or the man who locked it in a dark room while the rest of the world caught fire with new technology and ideas? Under his rule, you are safer from the schemes of corrupt officials than your ancestors ever were. But you live in a state of high tension. The nation is unified against a common enemy, but it is also an impoverished fortress cut off from the world. The Daewongun's iron will has bought the dynasty a few more years of fragile, defiant life, but his brutal purges and high taxes have created bitter enemies at home. His own son, the king, is growing into a man and resents his father's suffocating control. And just across the water, a newly modernized and ambitious Japanese empire is watching with predatory interest. The regent's violent, bloody attempt to keep the world out has only made it more determined than ever to find a way in. The iron will of the Joseon Daewongun had held the world at bay, but it could not last. The regent is eventually forced from power by his own son, King Gojong, urged on by his intelligent and politically astute wife, Queen Min. You, a citizen of the capital, watch as the stone walls of isolation begin to crumble. The new queen, who will posthumously be known as Empress Myeongsong, believes that the only way for Joseon to survive is not to fight the outside world, but to masterfully play the foreign powers against one another. She opens the ports, she brings in foreign advisors, she courts the Russians to balance the influence of the Chinese. It is a dangerous, high-stakes diplomatic game, and it puts her in direct conflict with her fiercely isolationist father-in-law, the old Daewongun. The nation is thrown into a dizzying spiral of change and chaos. In 1876, a modernized and ambitious Japan forces the unequal Treaty of Ganghwa upon Joseon, prying the country open to its influence. Suddenly, your ancient city is filled with sights you could never have imagined. Japanese soldiers in Western-style wool uniforms drill in the fields outside the city gates. Japanese merchants set up shops selling strange new goods. The quiet, predictable rhythm of life is shattered. This clash between tradition and forced modernization explodes into violence. In 1882, old-style soldiers, angry about their lack of pay and the favor shown to newly trained Japanese-style units, erupt in the Emo Mutiny. Secretly encouraged by the Daewongun, they storm the palace, murdering government ministers and Japanese advisors. Queen Min herself barely escapes with her life disguised as an ordinary court lady fleeing into the night. Just 2 years later, a group of radical pro-Japanese reformers launches the Gapsun coup, trying to overthrow the government and remake the country in Japan's image. The result is a bloody 3-day battle in the streets of Seoul. You learn to live with a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. The city is no longer a safe place. It's a tinderbox where the national hobbies have become plotting a coup and fleeing from a coup. The final tragic act of the dynasty is now set. The players are in their places. There is Empress Myeongsong, the clever and determined stateswoman, now leaning towards Russia to try and escape Japan's tightening grip. There is the Japanese government, who sees her as the primary obstacle to their complete domination of the Korean peninsula. And lurking in the shadows, bitter and resentful, is the old Daewongun, her implacable father-in-law and rival. On the cold pre-dawn morning of October 8, 1895, the Japanese minister to Korea, Miura Goro, unleashes a plan codenamed Operation Fox Hunt. The Fox is the Empress. A mixed force of Japanese soldiers, sword-wielding Ronin and Korean collaborators, storms Gyeongbok Palace. They cut down the palace guards and burst into the queen's sleeping quarters. The inner court, the sacred protected space of women, becomes a slaughterhouse. They grab terrified court ladies by the hair, demanding to know which one is the queen. When they find her, they cut her down without hesitation. To ensure the job is finished, they carry her body to a nearby grove of pine trees, douse it in oil, and set it ablaze. The Empress of Korea has been murdered, and her body desecrated by foreign agents in her own home. The exact level of involvement of the Daewongun in the plot to kill his own daughter-in-law remains one of the most hotly debated and painful questions in modern Korean history. Was he a knowing participant, or was he a pawn used by the Japanese to give their murderous coup a veneer of Korean legitimacy? We will never know for sure. In the aftermath of the assassination, the Japanese install a pro-Japanese cabinet. One of its first official acts is the infamous Top Knot Decree, or Danbalyong. This law required all Korean men to cut off their traditional top knots, the sangtu, which were a sacred symbol of manhood and family lineage in Confucian society. This deeply personal and humiliating act, coming on the heels of the nation's symbolic mother being murdered, caused a massive wave of outrage. It turns out that assassinating a country's queen and then giving all its men a forced bad haircut is not a winning hearts and minds strategy. Righteous armies of guerrilla fighters rise up across the country. King Gojong, a terrified puppet in his own palace, eventually flees to the Russian legation for a year. The dynasty is broken beyond repair. Though Gojong would later return and declare the founding of the Great Korean Empire in 1897, it was a hollow, tragic gesture. The Joseon dynasty, after 500 years of splendor, tragedy, and bloodshed, was over. And so the story of the long and often brutal Joseon dynasty comes to its violent and tragic close. The echoes of clashing swords and the quiet shuffling feet of plotting ministers finally begin to fade. The heavy perfumed air of the inner court, thick with secrets and sorrows, at last begins to clear. The ghosts of kings and queens, of martyred scholars and forgotten servants can finally rest. Let the images of the past soften, now their sharp and painful edges blurring, as they recede into the gentle quiet of the night. The grand imposing gates of the palace, which you saw as a gilded cage, now stand peacefully under the moonlight, no longer a prison, but a beautiful monument to a time that has long since passed. The stone courtyards, once stages for so much drama and despair, are now empty and still washed clean by the evening air. The tension you felt, the constant fear of a misstep, of a whisper of a change in the political winds, you can let all of that go now. The story is told. Your part in it is over. You are no longer in that place of danger. You are safe in your own space, in your own time, far removed from the troubles of centuries ago. Feel the gentle weight of your own blanket, the soft pillow beneath your head. Listen to the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breathing, a peaceful and reassuring sound in the stillness of your room. There are no more plots to uncover, no more dangers to survive. There is only the deep, welcoming calm of the approaching sleep. Let the last vestiges of this long journey drift away, leaving nothing behind but peace as you sink gently into your own sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.